standing in the corner office on the 15th floor of the Frostbank Tower, watching Kevin Davis walk through the glass doors of Thompson Associates for his first day of work, I felt a surge of electricity run through my entire body. Not the painful shock I'd experienced 10 years ago, when he packed his bags and moved in with a 22-year-old college intern. This was something entirely different. Something that tasted like justice, served at exactly the right temperature. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. By the time Kevin realized that the regional director position he'd been told he'd be reporting to belonged to Sarah Mitchell, his ex-wife who he'd left financially devastated a decade earlier, I had already prepared every single detail of how this reunion would unfold. The expression on his face when Jennifer Walsh from HR led him to my office and introduced me as his new supervisor was worth every sleepless night I'd spent rebuilding my life from the ground up after he destroyed it. 10 years earlier, I was Sarah Davis, a 25-year-old woman whose world collapsed on a sweltering Austin afternoon in July. Kevin and I had been married for 3 years, living in a modest house in Cedar Park that stretched our budget to its absolute limit. I was working part-time at a local nonprofit while trying to finish my business degree at UT, juggling evening classes with a job that barely covered our grocery bills. Kevin worked at a small marketing firm downtown, constantly complaining about his low salary and limited opportunities for advancement. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I believed we were building something together. When Kevin started talking about his ambitious plans for the future, about becoming a creative director at a major firm and eventually starting his own agency, I supported those dreams with everything I had. I took on extra shifts at the nonprofit, sold my grandmother's jewelry to help pay for his professional development courses, and postponed my own graduation by a full year so we could afford his networking events and industry conferences. What I didn't realize was that Kevin's sudden enthusiasm for professional growth had very little to do with marketing strategies and everything to do with Brittany Chen, a communications major from Texas State who had started as a summer intern at his company. She was everything I wasn't at that point in my life. Young, carefree, unburdened by financial stress, or the responsibilities that came with being married to someone whose ambitions far exceeded his current capabilities. The revelation came on a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be in my corporate finance class, but had skipped to surprise Kevin with lunch at his office. I'd spent my last $20 on sandwiches from his favorite deli, thinking we could eat together in the small break room where he'd first told me he loved me 2 years earlier. Instead, I found him in the empty conference room with Brittany, their bodies pressed against each other with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't their first intimate encounter. They didn't see me standing in the doorway. Kevin's hands were tangled in her long black hair, and she was whispering something against his neck that made him laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. The sound of that laughter, so genuine and unguarded, hurt more than seeing them together physically. It was the sound of someone who was completely, authentically happy in a way he'd never been with me. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, watching my husband kiss another woman with the kind of passion that belonged in movies, not in the sterile conference room of a mid-tier marketing firm. When I finally backed away from the doorway, my hands were shaking so violently that I dropped the bag containing our lunch. The sound of the containers hitting the floor echoed through the hallway, but Kevin and Brittany were too absorbed in each other to notice. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I had witnessed. Part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation, some context that would make what I'd seen less devastating than it appeared. Maybe it was a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness that Kevin would immediately regret. Maybe he would come home that evening full of apologies and promises to recommit to our marriage. Instead, Kevin came home 3 hours late with the kind of defensive energy that immediately told me he knew something had shifted. He moved through our small house like someone preparing for a confrontation, setting down his briefcase with deliberate care and avoiding eye contact as he headed toward the kitchen. "How was your day?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and staring at its contents as if the answer to our marital problems might be hidden behind the leftover takeout containers. "Interesting," I replied, sitting at our small dining table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations about our future together. "I decided to surprise you with lunch today, but you seemed busy." Kevin's shoulders tensed, and he slowly closed the refrigerator door. When he turned to face me, his expression was a mixture of guilt and something that looked almost like relief. It was the face of someone who'd been carrying a secret that had become too heavy to bear alone. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, pulling out the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone who understood that the next few minutes would determine the trajectory of both our lives. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 4 hours and covered everything from Kevin's growing dissatisfaction with our marriage to his belief that we'd gotten married too young, before either of us really knew who we were or what we wanted. He talked about feeling trapped by our financial struggles, suffocated by the pressure to be a responsible husband, when he still felt like he was figuring out his own identity. But mostly, he talked about Brittany, how she made him feel alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible, how their connection was natural and effortless, unlike the complicated negotiations that had characterized our relationship for the past year. How being with her reminded him of who he used to be before the weight of adult responsibilities had worn him down. "I never meant for this to happen," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction that would have made the apology meaningful. "But I can't pretend anymore that what we have is working. We're both miserable, Sarah. We've been miserable for months." The most devastating part wasn't Kevin's confession of infidelity, or even his decision to leave our marriage. It was the realization that while I had been working multiple jobs and sacrificing my own education to support what I thought were our shared dreams, he had been evaluating our relationship like a business venture that was no longer profitable. Kevin moved out the following weekend, taking most of our shared belongings and leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't afford on a house that suddenly felt enormous and impossibly empty. He transferred to Brittany's apartment near the UT campus, a trendy place with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that represented everything our Cedar Park house wasn't: young, stylish, and unburdened by the compromises that come with building a life together. The divorce proceedings took 8 months and consumed what little savings I had managed to accumulate during our marriage. Kevin's attorney argued that since we'd been married for such a short time and had no children, the asset division should be straightforward and equitable. What they didn't account for was that equitable meant very different things to someone who had sacrificed their education and career trajectory versus someone who had used the marriage as a stepping stone to something better. I received half the value of our house, which barely covered the real estate fees and moving expenses. Kevin kept his car, his computer equipment, and most importantly, his uninterrupted career progression at the marketing firm where he'd met Brittany. I was left with student loan debt, a disrupted education, and the kind of professional gap that makes employers ask uncomfortable questions during job interviews. The first year after the divorce was the most difficult period of my adult life. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in South Austin that was all I could afford on my part-time nonprofit salary. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' conversations, and the air conditioning unit made a grinding noise that kept me awake most nights. I finished my degree by taking classes online while working full-time at a customer service call center, studying marketing principles. During my lunch breaks with a determination that bordered on obsession, Rachel Torres, who had been my study partner in several business classes, became my closest friend and most important mentor during this period. She was 5 years older than me and worked as an account coordinator at Thompson Associates, one of Austin's most respected marketing firms. Rachel had gone through her own difficult divorce 3 years earlier and understood the particular challenges of rebuilding your professional identity while processing personal betrayal. "The thing about being underestimated," Rachel told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings at Grind Coffee on South Lamar, "is that it gives you an advantage most people never recognize. When someone writes you off, they stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. They miss the moment when you become dangerous. Rachel's insight proved prophetic. While Kevin was enjoying his new relationship and advancing in his career at the small firm where he'd met Brittany, I was systematically building the foundation for a professional comeback that would exceed anything I'd previously imagined possible. I graduated summa cum laude with my business degree, completed a professional certification in digital marketing strategy, and began networking within Austin's tight-knit business community with the focused intensity of someone who understood that relationships were the real currency of professional success. My opportunity came when Rachel mentioned that Thompson Associates was expanding their operations team and looking for someone with strong analytical skills and client relationship experience. The position was entry-level, but it was at a firm with a reputation for promoting from within and supporting employee development. More importantly, it was a chance to enter Austin's marketing industry at a company that competed directly with the smaller firms where Kevin had built his career. The interview process was rigorous, involving 3 rounds of meetings with different department heads and a presentation on digital marketing trends that required me to demonstrate both strategic thinking and practical implementation skills. Michael Thompson, the CEO who had founded the company 26 years earlier, conducted the final interview himself. "Sarah, your resume shows some interesting gaps," he said, reviewing the documents spread across his massive oak desk. "Can you help me understand the timeline here?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had prepared for this question, knowing that my unconventional career path would require explanation. But instead of offering excuses or minimizing the impact of my divorce, I decided to be completely honest about how personal challenges had shaped my professional development. "Mr. Thompson, I went through a difficult divorce that disrupted my education and early career trajectory," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "But that experience taught me things about resilience, strategic thinking, and client relationship management that I couldn't have learned any other way. I know what it's like to rebuild from nothing, and I understand the value of the opportunities I'm given." Michael's expression shifted as I spoke, and he leaned forward with the kind of focused attention that indicated genuine interest rather than polite professionalism. "Tell me more about that," he said. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining how the skills I'd developed while navigating my divorce, from financial planning under extreme constraints to negotiating with hostile parties while maintaining professional composure, had prepared me for the complex client relationships that were essential to marketing success. I described how my part-time work at the nonprofit had taught me to maximize limited resources, and how completing my degree while working full-time had demonstrated my ability to manage multiple priorities without sacrificing quality. By the end of the conversation, Michael was nodding with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested the interview had exceeded his expectations. "Sarah, we see a lot of candidates with impressive credentials and traditional career paths," he said. "But what we really need are people who understand that marketing is fundamentally about solving problems and building relationships under pressure. Your background suggests you have both skills in abundance." I started at Thompson Associates the following Monday as an account coordinator, earning more money than I'd ever made in my life and working with clients whose marketing budgets exceeded the annual revenue of my previous employers. The learning curve was steep, but I approached every project with the hungry determination of someone who understood that this opportunity represented far more than just a job. Rachel became my unofficial mentor, teaching me the nuances of client management and helping me understand the political dynamics that shaped decision-making at a firm of Thompson Associates' size and reputation. She introduced me to key players in Austin's business community and included me in networking events where I could build relationships with potential clients and industry influencers. The marketing industry in Austin is smaller than people realize, Rachel explained during one of our strategy sessions. "Everyone knows everyone, and your reputation travels faster than you might expect. The key is to be consistently excellent in everything you do, because people remember quality work, and they remember professionals who make their lives easier. I took Rachel's advice to heart, approaching every client interaction and internal project with meticulous attention to detail and a service orientation that set me apart from colleagues who viewed their work as routine rather than strategic. Within 6 months, I was managing accounts that other coordinators found too demanding. And within a year, I was being invited to client meetings that typically included only senior staff members. My breakthrough came during my second year at Thompson Associates, when I identified a significant opportunity to expand our relationship with Central Texas Medical Systems, a regional healthcare network that had been a modest client for several years. Their marketing spend was relatively small, but I recognized that they were in the early stages of a major expansion that would require sophisticated digital marketing support. Instead of waiting for Central Texas Medical to approach us with their expanded needs, I researched their growth plans, analyzed their competitive landscape, and prepared a comprehensive proposal that outlined how Thompson Associates could support their expansion while significantly improving their market positioning. The proposal required me to work nights and weekends for 3 weeks, but it demonstrated strategic thinking that impressed both my colleagues and the client. The presentation I delivered to Central Texas Medical's executive team resulted in a 3-year contract worth over $2 million annually, the largest new client acquisition in Thompson Associates' recent history. More importantly, it established me as someone who could identify and capture opportunities that others missed. Michael Thompson called me into his office the day after we signed the Central Texas Medical contract, and I could tell from his expression that the conversation would be significant for my career trajectory. "Sarah, what you accomplished with Central Texas Medical represents exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need more of at this company," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "You didn't just respond to their needs, you anticipated them. That's the difference between good account management and exceptional business development." Over the next 3 years, I was promoted twice, first to senior account manager and then to client strategy director, with salary increases that reflected my growing value to the company. I purchased a modern townhouse in Westlake Hills, drove a BMW X3, and established myself as one of Austin's rising marketing professionals. But more importantly, I had rebuilt my sense of self-worth and professional identity in ways that went far beyond financial success. The transformation wasn't just professional. The woman who had been devastated by Kevin's betrayal had evolved into someone who understood her own value and refused to accept less than she deserved in any area of her life. I dated occasionally, but never with the desperate need for validation that had characterized my early 20s. I had learned to be completely comfortable with my own company and to evaluate potential relationships based on what they added to my life rather than what they filled in terms of loneliness or insecurity. Rachel, who had become one of my closest friends, often commented on how different I seemed from the woman she'd met at Grind Coffee 7 years earlier. "You carry yourself differently now," she observed during one of our monthly dinners at the Capitol Grill. "You move through the world like someone who knows exactly what she's worth." The opportunity that would bring Kevin back into my orbit came when Michael Thompson announced his plan to restructure the company's leadership team to support continued growth. Thompson Associates had expanded to 85 employees and was approaching $15 million in annual revenue, making it one of Austin's most successful mid-size marketing firms. The restructuring would create several new director-level positions, including Regional Director of Operations, a role that would oversee all client relationships and account management for the company's largest contracts. "Sarah, I want you to consider applying for the Regional Director position," Michael said during our quarterly performance review. "Your track record with strategic account development and your understanding of our operational systems make you an ideal candidate. The role would give you oversight of our entire account management team and direct involvement in business development strategy. The promotion would represent the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since joining Thompson Associates. It would also make me one of the youngest director-level executives in Austin's marketing industry and position me for even greater opportunities in the future. But perhaps most significantly, it would give me hiring authority for senior-level positions within the account management team. When Jennifer Walsh from HR mentioned that they were planning to recruit a new senior account manager to support the expanded operations team, I volunteered to participate in the candidate review process. It seemed like a natural extension of my new responsibilities, and I was genuinely interested in helping build a stronger team. I was reviewing resumes in my new corner office when Jennifer knocked on my door with a stack of applications for the senior account manager position. "Sarah, we've got some interesting candidates for this role," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Several have experience at competing firms here in Austin, which could bring valuable insights about industry trends and client expectations." I began reviewing the applications that evening, paying careful attention to each candidate's experience and cultural fit with Thompson Associates' collaborative approach to client service. The third resume in the stack made me set down my coffee cup and read more carefully. Kevin Davis, Senior Account Manager at Digital Edge Marketing, 7 years of experience in creative campaign development and social media strategy. The photograph, attached to his application, showed a man who looked older than his 38 years, with lines around his eyes that suggested stress or fatigue. His experience was solid but unremarkable, the kind of steady career progression that indicated competence without exceptional achievement. What struck me most was how different he looked from the confident young man who had left our marriage for what he believed would be unlimited possibilities. According to his resume, Kevin had remained at Digital Edge Marketing for the entire decade since our divorce, advancing from associate account manager to senior account manager, but never achieving the creative director role he'd once described as his ultimate goal. His listed achievements were respectable but modest: successful campaign launches for local restaurants and small retail chains, social media strategies that had generated decent engagement numbers, client relationships that had been maintained rather than expanded. It was the resume of someone whose career had plateaued, who had found a comfortable position, but never developed the strategic vision or leadership capabilities that would elevate him to senior management. In contrast to my own trajectory over the same period, Kevin's professional growth suggested someone who had settled for security over ambition. I spent that evening researching Digital Edge Marketing and Kevin's role within the company, using industry databases and professional networks to understand his current position in Austin's marketing landscape. What I discovered was that he had become a reliable but unremarkable middle manager at a firm that was struggling to compete with companies like Thompson Associates for high-value clients. The irony was remarkable. While Kevin had left our marriage because he felt trapped by limitations and responsibilities, his career had stagnated in ways that suggested he'd never developed the skills necessary to transcend those limitations. Meanwhile, the woman he'd left behind had used the same challenges as motivation to build exactly the kind of professional success he'd once claimed to want. When Jennifer called me the next morning to discuss the candidate pool, I made sure my voice remained professionally neutral as I provided feedback on Kevin's application. "The candidate from Digital Edge Marketing has solid experience," I said, reviewing his resume as if for the first time. "His background in creative campaign development could complement our strategic planning capabilities. I think he deserves serious consideration." What I didn't mention was that Kevin Davis was about to discover that the life he'd abandoned 10 years earlier had evolved into something far more successful than anything he'd built for himself. He was about to learn that underestimating someone's potential can have consequences that extend far beyond the original relationship. The interview process would give me an opportunity to evaluate not just Kevin's professional qualifications, but his character and judgment in ways that would determine whether he deserved a place on my team. More importantly, it would allow me to demonstrate exactly how much I'd grown since he'd decided I wasn't worth the investment of his loyalty and commitment. As I prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most interesting job interview of my Career, I realized that Rachel had been absolutely right about the advantage of being underestimated. Kevin had stopped paying attention to what I was actually doing the moment he decided I wasn't worth his consideration. He had missed the moment when I became dangerous, and now he was about to discover exactly what that oversight would cost him. The interview was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, giving me 3 days to prepare for what would either be the most professionally satisfying conversation of my career or an awkward encounter that I'd need to handle with exceptional diplomacy. I had participated in dozens of hiring interviews since becoming client strategy director, but none had carried the personal weight that this one would bear. Kevin had no idea that Sarah Mitchell, the regional director of operations at Thompson Associates, was the same woman he'd left financially devastated in a Cedar Park house that she couldn't afford to maintain. He had no way of knowing that the successful executive whose name appeared on Austin Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list was the same person who had once sold her grandmother's jewelry to fund his professional development courses. The irony was delicious in ways that I was still learning to appreciate. While I had spent the past decade building expertise in strategic planning and client relationship management, Kevin had remained in the comfortable middle management position where ambition goes to die slowly. His LinkedIn profile, which I reviewed, with the thoroughness of someone conducting competitive intelligence, showed a man who had stopped growing professionally around the same time he'd stopped investing in our marriage. Digital Edge Marketing was exactly the kind of firm that talented professionals used as a stepping stone to better opportunities. The fact that Kevin had remained there for 7 years suggested either a lack of ambition or an absence of the skills necessary to compete for positions at more prestigious companies. His portfolio of work, available through the company's website, demonstrated competent execution of routine marketing campaigns, without the innovative thinking that distinguished industry leaders from steady performers. I spent Tuesday evening researching Kevin's recent professional activities, using the same analytical approach I brought to evaluating potential business partners or competitive threats. His social media presence was professionally maintained but uninspiring, featuring the kind of generic posts about marketing trends and industry insights that suggested someone who consumed thought leadership content rather than creating it. His client testimonials were positive but lukewarm, praising his reliability and responsiveness without mentioning strategic vision or exceptional results. Most revealing was what his digital footprint didn't contain. There were no speaking engagements at industry conferences, no published articles or thought leadership pieces, no evidence of the kind of professional reputation that would make him a sought-after candidate for senior positions. Kevin Davis had become exactly what he'd feared during our marriage, someone whose career had settled into a comfortable but unremarkable pattern. Wednesday morning brought an email from Jennifer Walsh confirming the interview schedule and providing Kevin's completed application materials, including references from his current supervisor and 2 former clients. I reviewed these documents with the careful attention I gave to all hiring decisions, but I was particularly interested in understanding how Kevin presented himself to potential employers and what his professional references revealed about his character and capabilities. His cover letter was competently written, but generic, the kind of document that could have been adapted for any senior marketing position at any mid-size firm. Kevin described his experience in terms of tasks completed and responsibilities fulfilled. Rather than problems solved or opportunities created, he positioned himself as someone who could execute established strategies rather than someone who could develop innovative approaches to complex challenges. The references painted a picture of a reliable employee who met expectations without exceeding them. His supervisor at Digital Edge Marketing praised Kevin's punctuality and professional demeanor while noting that he works well within established parameters and maintains positive relationships with existing clients. The language was diplomatic, but told a story of someone who had learned to operate safely within his comfort zone rather than pushing boundaries or taking calculated risks. One of his client references, a restaurant owner whose social media campaigns Kevin had managed for 3 years, described him as easy to work with and responsive to our needs, but also mentioned that We've had to seek additional creative input from other sources for our more ambitious marketing initiatives. The subtext was clear. Kevin was competent at maintaining existing relationships, but lacked the strategic vision necessary to drive significant growth or innovation. As I prepared for Thursday's interview, I found myself experiencing a complex mixture of professional curiosity and personal satisfaction. The woman Kevin had left behind had evolved into exactly the kind of executive he'd once claimed he wanted to become, while his own career had stagnated in ways that suggested he'd never developed the skills necessary to achieve his stated ambitions. The interview would give me an opportunity to evaluate Kevin's qualifications objectively, while also observing how he responded to finding himself in a position where his professional future depended on impressing the woman whose personal future he'd once considered expendable. More importantly, it would allow me to demonstrate the kind of grace and professionalism that distinguished successful leaders from people who simply held leadership titles. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp April weather that made Austin feel like the most beautiful city in Texas. I dressed carefully for the interview, choosing a tailored navy suit that projected authority without being intimidating, and arrived at the office 30 minutes early to review my notes and prepare mentally for what would undoubtedly be an unusual conversation. Jennifer Walsh knocked on my office door at 9:45 to confirm that Kevin had arrived and was waiting in the reception area. "He seems nervous," she observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "More nervous than most candidates for this level position. Do you want me to sit in on the interview, or would you prefer to conduct it yourself?" "I'll handle this one personally," I replied, gathering the interview materials and Kevin's application file. "But please make sure we're not disturbed for the next hour. I want to give this candidate my full attention." I walked toward the reception area with the measured pace of someone who was completely comfortable with her own authority and genuinely curious about how the next hour would unfold. Kevin was sitting in one of the leather chairs near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Austin, scrolling through his phone with the distracted energy of someone trying to manage pre-interview anxiety. He looked up as I approached, and I watched his expression shift from polite professional interest to confusion, to recognition, to something that might have been panic. Kevin's face went through a remarkable transformation in the span of 3 seconds, and I could practically see him calculating whether there was any way this situation could be anything other than what it appeared to be. "Kevin Davis?" I extended my hand with the same warm professionalism I used when meeting any potential new team member. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, Regional Director of Operations. Thank you for your interest in joining Thompson Associates." Kevin stood slowly, shaking my hand with the kind of careful formality that suggested he was still processing the reality of our encounter. "Sarah," he said, and I could hear him testing whether using my first name was appropriate given our new professional context. "I have to say, this is unexpected." "I imagine it is," I replied, maintaining the pleasant tone I used for all business interactions. "Shall we head to my office? I'm looking forward to learning more about your experience and career goals." The walk to my corner office gave Kevin time to observe the scope of my professional success, from the respectful greetings I received from colleagues to the expansive view of Austin's skyline that my office commanded. I could see him taking in details that would help him understand exactly how much my circumstances had changed since he'd last considered my potential worth his investment. My office was a reflection of the professional identity I'd built over the past decade, sophisticated but not ostentatious, with client awards and industry recognitions displayed alongside photographs from company events and charitable initiatives. The overall effect was that of someone who had earned her position through competence and strategic thinking rather than political maneuvering or fortunate circumstances. "Please, have a seat," I said, gesturing toward the comfortable chairs arranged around a small conference table near the windows. "Can I offer you coffee or water before we begin?" Kevin settled into his chair with the careful movements of someone who was still adjusting to the surreal nature of our situation. "Coffee would be great," he said, and I could see him looking around the office with the kind of detailed attention that suggested he was trying to reconcile the successful executive he was meeting with the struggling graduate student he'd once been married to. I poured coffee for both of us from the service set that my assistant maintained for client meetings, taking care to demonstrate the kind of gracious hospitality that had become second nature in my role as a senior executive. The ritual gave Kevin additional time to process our circumstances and gave me an opportunity to observe how he was handling this unexpected reunion. "So," I said, settling into my chair with Kevin's application file open before me, "tell me, what drew you to this opportunity at Thompson Associates?" Kevin's response was carefully constructed, the kind of diplomatic answer that acknowledged our personal history without dwelling on it inappropriately. "Thompson Associates has an excellent reputation in Austin's marketing community," he said, his voice steadier than I'd expected given the circumstances. "The company's growth trajectory and client roster suggest exactly the kind of strategic thinking and creative execution that I'd like to be part of." It was a professional answer that revealed nothing about his motivations, while demonstrating that he understood the need to maintain appropriate boundaries during our interview. I found myself impressed despite my personal feelings about his character. Whatever his limitations as a husband had been, Kevin clearly understood how to navigate complex social situations with reasonable grace. "What specifically appeals to you about moving from digital edge marketing to a larger firm like ours?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on his current professional circumstances. Kevin paused before answering, and I could see him weighing how much honesty was appropriate given our complicated history. "Digital edge has been a good place to develop my skills and build client relationships," he said finally. "But I've reached a point where I'm ready for more challenging opportunities and the chance to work with larger, more sophisticated clients." The subtext was clear. Kevin's career had stagnated at digital edge marketing, and he was looking for opportunities that his current position couldn't provide. What he didn't seem to realize was that his professional plateau might reflect limitations in his own capabilities rather than restrictions imposed by his current environment. "Can you walk me through some of your most significant achievements over the past few years?" I asked, leaning back in my chair with the relaxed attention of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar conversations. "I'm particularly interested in situations where you've had to develop creative solutions to complex client challenges." Kevin's response revealed both his strengths and limitations as a marketing professional. He described several successful campaigns he'd managed for local businesses, demonstrating competent project management and solid understanding of digital marketing fundamentals. But his examples lacked the strategic sophistication and innovative thinking that characterized the work we did at Thompson Associates for our most demanding clients. More telling was how Kevin framed his achievements. He consistently described his role in terms of executing strategies developed by others rather than creating original approaches to client challenges. Even his most successful campaigns seemed to follow established templates rather than representing breakthrough thinking that could be adapted to other situations. "That's interesting," I said after he'd finished describing a social media campaign for a local restaurant chain. "How did you measure the long-term impact of that work? What metrics did you use to evaluate whether the campaign created sustainable value for the client?" Kevin's pause before answering told me that he hadn't considered the strategic implications of his work beyond immediate execution and basics performance metrics. His response focused on engagement numbers and short-term sales increases without addressing customer lifetime value, brand positioning, or competitive advantage. It was exactly the kind of tactical thinking that separated competent account managers from strategic business partners. Kevin could execute marketing campaigns effectively, but he lacked the analytical framework necessary to understand whether those campaigns were creating lasting value for clients or simply generating activity that looked impressive in monthly reports. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering Kevin's experience with client relationship management, his approach to creative problem-solving, and his understanding of current industry trends. Throughout our conversation, I found myself evaluating him with the same objective criteria I applied to any candidate while simultaneously processing the strange experience of professionally assessing someone whose personal judgment had once devastated my life. Kevin's qualifications were solid but unremarkable. He possessed the technical skills necessary to perform the senior account manager role competently, and his experience at Digital Edge Marketing had given him exposure to the kinds of challenges he'd face at Thompson Associates. His references were positive, and his professional demeanor during our interview suggested that he could integrate successfully into our company culture. But Kevin also lacked the exceptional qualities that distinguished outstanding hires from merely acceptable ones. He demonstrated competence without creativity, reliability without innovation, and professional experience without strategic vision. He was exactly the kind of candidate who could fill a position adequately without elevating the team's overall capabilities. As our interview concluded, I found myself facing a decision that would test both my professional judgment and my personal integrity. Kevin Davis was qualified for the senior account manager position, but he wasn't the strongest candidate in our pool. Hiring him would mean choosing adequacy over excellence, and it would also mean working closely with someone whose character I had good reason to question. "Kevin, thank you for your time today," I said, standing to signal the end of our formal interview. "We're planning to make a decision within the next week, and Jennifer will be in touch to let you know our timeline for next steps." Kevin stood, as well, extending his hand with the same careful formality he'd shown throughout our conversation. "Sarah, I appreciate the opportunity to interview for this position," he said. "I hope you'll consider my qualifications objectively, despite our personal history." It was a reasonable request that demonstrated more emotional intelligence than I'd given him credit for. Kevin understood that our past relationship could complicate my evaluation of his professional merits, and he was asking for the kind of fair consideration that any candidate deserved. "Of course," I replied, shaking his hand with professional courtesy. "All of our hiring decisions are based on qualifications, cultural fit, and the candidate's ability to contribute to our team's success. Personal considerations don't factor into those evaluations." As Kevin left my office, I realized that our interview had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had given me closure on our relationship in ways that went beyond professional satisfaction or personal vindication. Seeing Kevin as a job candidate rather than as my former husband had allowed me to evaluate him with clarity that our emotional history had previously made impossible. The man who had once seemed so confident and ambitious that I'd sacrificed my own goals to support his dreams was revealed to be someone whose professional growth had been limited by the same character, traits that had made him an unreliable partner. Kevin's tendency to choose comfort over challenge, his preference for maintaining existing relationships rather than building new ones, and his focus on short-term benefits rather than long-term value creation had shaped both his career trajectory and his personal decisions. More importantly, the interview had demonstrated how completely my own life had changed. The woman Kevin had left behind no longer existed. In her place was someone who commanded respect through competence, who made decisions based on strategic thinking rather than emotional reactivity, and who understood her own worth well enough to evaluate others without being influenced by past disappointments or current grievances. That evening, I met Rachel Torres for dinner at the Capitol Grill, our traditional location for celebrating professional milestones and processing significant life events. Rachel had been my closest confidant throughout my recovery from the divorce and my subsequent career development, and I knew she would be fascinated by the day's events. "So," Rachel said after we'd ordered wine and settled into our usual corner table, "how did it feel to interview your ex-husband for a job?" "Surreal," I admitted, taking a sip of the Cabernet Sauvignon that had become my standard celebration drink, but also clarifying in ways I didn't expect. I described the interview in detail, from Kevin's initial shock at discovering my identity to his careful professionalism throughout our conversation. Rachel listened with the focused attention she brought to all my professional updates, asking strategic questions that helped me process both the emotional and practical implications of the situation. "What's your gut feeling about his qualifications?" Rachel asked after I'd finished my account of the interview. "He's competent but not exceptional," I said, considering my response carefully. "Kevin could do the job adequately, but he wouldn't elevate our team's capabilities or bring innovative thinking to client challenges. He's exactly what he was 10 years ago. Someone who can execute other people's ideas effectively, but lacks the vision to create breakthrough solutions." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "And how does that make you feel, knowing that you've grown so much while his development seems to have plateaued?" It was a perceptive question that went to the heart of what the interview had revealed about both Kevin and myself. "Grateful," I said after considering her question seriously. "Grateful that his decision to leave our marriage forced me to discover capabilities I never would have developed if I'd remained in a relationship where I was constantly accommodating someone else's limitations." The conversation continued, late into the evening, covering everything from the practical considerations of potentially hiring Kevin to the larger implications of how our lives had diverged since our divorce. Rachel's perspective helped me understand that the interview had been less about Kevin's qualifications and more about measuring how completely I'd recovered from the damage his betrayal had caused. "Sarah, you realize what's happening here, don't you?" Rachel said as we prepared to leave the restaurant. "Kevin Davis is about to discover that leaving you was the biggest professional mistake of his life, not just personally, but professionally. You've become exactly the kind of successful, well-connected executive who could have accelerated his career if he'd had the wisdom to value what he had." Rachel's observation was astute in ways that I was only beginning to appreciate. Kevin's decision to leave our marriage hadn't just cost him a relationship. It had cost him access to the professional network and strategic thinking capabilities that I'd developed over the subsequent decade. The woman he'd underestimated had become someone whose recommendation could transform careers and whose professional relationships could open doors throughout Austin's business community. As I drove home to my Westlake Hills townhouse, I reflected on how dramatically the balance of power had shifted since our divorce. 10 years ago, Kevin had held all the advantages: a steady job, professional connections, and the freedom to pursue opportunities without considering anyone else's needs or limitations. I had been left with debt, disrupted education, and the challenge of rebuilding both my financial stability and my sense of self-worth. Now, Kevin was the one seeking opportunities, hoping to impress someone whose professional judgment would determine his career trajectory. He was the one who needed to prove his value and demonstrate that he deserved consideration for a position that could provide the career advancement his current job couldn't offer. The reversal was poetic in ways that went beyond simple justice. Kevin had made a calculated decision that my potential wasn't worth the investment of his loyalty and commitment. Time had proven that calculation to be spectacularly wrong, and now he was in the position of needing to convince the woman he'd underestimated that he possessed qualities worth investing in professionally. Friday morning brought additional perspective on Kevin's interview and my decision about whether to recommend him for the senior account manager position. I spent the early part of the day reviewing applications from our other candidates, comparing their qualifications and experience to Kevin's background, and assessing which candidate would best serve Thompson Associates' long-term interests. Two other candidates stood out as potentially stronger choices. Maria Santos was a senior account manager at a competing firm with an impressive track record of strategic account development and innovative campaign creation. Her portfolio demonstrated exactly the kind of creative problem-solving and strategic thinking that Kevin had lacked during our interview. James Chen was a rising star at a Dallas marketing firm who was looking to relocate to Austin for family reasons. His experience included work with technology clients whose sophisticated needs would challenge our team to develop more advanced capabilities. James had also published several industry articles and spoken at professional conferences, suggesting the kind of thought leadership that could enhance Thompson Associates' reputation. Both Maria and James were clearly superior candidates from a purely professional standpoint. They possessed not only the technical skills necessary to excel in the senior account manager role, but also the strategic vision and innovative thinking that could contribute to our company's continued growth and competitive advantage. The decision should have been straightforward. Hire the best candidate regardless of personal history or emotional considerations. But the situation was complicated by factors that went beyond Kevin's qualifications or my personal feelings about our past relationship. Hiring Kevin would mean working closely with someone whose character I had reason to question, but it would also provide an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of professional grace and emotional maturity that distinguished exceptional leaders from people who simply held leadership positions. It would show my colleagues and superiors that I could make hiring decisions based on business considerations rather than personal grievances. More intriguingly, hiring Kevin would give me a front-row seat to observe how he handled working for the woman he'd once considered unworthy of his commitment and investment. It would allow me to evaluate whether his character had evolved during the past decade or whether he remained the same person who prioritized short-term comfort over long-term value creation. The decision I made would reveal as much about my own professional development and emotional maturity as it would about Kevin's qualifications or potential contributions to our team. It would test whether I had truly moved beyond the pain of our divorce or whether I remained influenced by the desire for validation or vindication. As I weighed these considerations, I realized that the choice I made would set the tone for how I approached similar situations throughout my career. Leadership positions inevitably involved making decisions about people whose personal histories intersected with professional considerations, and the precedent I established with Kevin's application would influence how I handled such situations in the future. The phone call that would change everything came at 2:30 Friday afternoon, just as I was preparing to finalize my recommendation about the senior account manager position. Jennifer Walsh's voice carried an urgency that immediately commanded my attention. "Sarah, we need to talk about the Kevin Davis application," she said without her usual preliminary pleasantries. "I just received some information that could significantly impact our hiring decision." Jennifer's tone carried the kind of professional concern that immediately made me set aside Kevin's application file and focus entirely on her call. In my 3 years as client strategy director and recent promotion to regional director, I had learned to recognize when HR conversations shifted from routine personnel matters to situations that required careful handling and strategic thinking. "What kind of information?" I asked, reaching for a notepad to document whatever Jennifer was about to share. My experience managing complex client relationships had taught me that seemingly minor details often had significant implications when viewed within broader context. "I received a call from Patricia Williams at Digital Edge Marketing," Jennifer said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background as she referenced her notes. "She's their HR director, and she wanted to have what she called an informal conversation about Kevin's application with us." The fact that Kevin's current employer was reaching out unsolicited about his job application immediately raised red flags. In Austin's relatively small marketing community, it wasn't unusual for HR professionals to share general information about candidates, but proactive calls about specific applications typically indicated either exceptional performance or significant concerns that wouldn't appear in standard reference checks. "Did Patricia provide specific details about her concerns?" I asked, already anticipating that this conversation would complicate my hiring decision in ways that went far beyond Kevin's qualifications or our personal history. "She was diplomatically vague," Jennifer replied, "but she mentioned some performance issues and professional judgment concerns that have emerged over the past 6 months. Patricia suggested that we might want to conduct additional reference checks before making any hiring decisions." The euphemistic language was typical of HR communications designed to share warnings without creating legal liability. But the message was clear. Digital Edge Marketing had discovered problems with Kevin's performance or behavior that they couldn't address directly in formal references, but felt obligated to communicate informally to potential employers. Did Patricia provide any specifics about the nature of these performance issues? I asked, recognizing that I needed to understand the scope of whatever problems Kevin was experiencing at his current job. She mentioned concerns about client relationship management and some questions about his judgment in handling sensitive business information, Jennifer said carefully. Patricia also indicated that Digital Edge has been documenting these issues, but didn't elaborate on what that documentation might contain. The mention of client relationship problems and judgment concerns about sensitive information suggested serious professional issues that could affect Kevin's ability to perform successfully in any senior marketing role. More importantly, these problems had apparently developed recently, which meant they represented current challenges rather than historical issues that might have been resolved through professional development or changed circumstances. Jennifer, did Patricia indicate whether Kevin is aware that Digital Edge has concerns about his performance? I asked, trying to understand whether Kevin had been forthright about his current professional standing during our interview. That's where it gets interesting, Jennifer replied, and I could hear her turning pages as she reviewed her conversation notes. Patricia mentioned that Kevin submitted his resignation 2 weeks ago, but she seemed surprised that he was already interviewing. Elsewhere, she said something about expecting him to use his notice period to address outstanding issues, rather than immediately pursuing new opportunities. This information fundamentally changed my understanding of Kevin's application and his motivation for seeking a position at Thompson Associates. Rather than being a strategic career move toward a more prestigious firm, his application appeared to be an attempt to escape problems at his current job before they could damage his professional reputation or result in termination. The fact that Kevin hadn't mentioned his resignation during our interview was particularly concerning. When I'd asked about his timeline for making a career transition, he'd presented his interest in Thompson Associates as a natural next step in his professional development, rather than as an urgent need to leave his current position under difficult circumstances. Did Patricia provide any indication of what these outstanding issues might involve? I asked, recognizing that I needed to understand the full scope of Kevin's professional problems before making any decisions about his candidacy. She was careful not to provide specifics that could create legal complications, Jennifer said, but she did mention concerns about boundary issues with client relationships and suggested that Kevin has been having difficulty maintaining appropriate professional standards in his interactions with both clients and colleagues. The phrase, boundary issues with client relationships, was particularly troubling because it suggested problems that went beyond simple performance deficiencies to potentially involve inappropriate personal conduct. In the marketing industry, client relationships were built on trust and professional integrity, and any suggestion of boundary violations could indicate serious character flaws that would make Kevin unsuitable for any client-facing role. Jennifer, I think we need to conduct additional research before proceeding with Kevin's application, I said, making notes about follow-up actions that would be necessary to properly evaluate his candidacy. Can you reach out to some of our industry contacts to see if anyone has heard about issues at Digital Edge or concerns about Kevin's professional reputation? Already ahead of you, Jennifer replied with the efficiency that had made her one of Austin's most respected HR professionals. I've got calls in to 3 people who have connections at Digital Edge and should be able to provide more detailed information about Kevin's situation. The conversation with Jennifer transformed my perspective on Kevin's interview and his application for the senior account manager position. What I had initially viewed as an interesting coincidence that would allow me to demonstrate professional grace while evaluating a former spouse's qualifications now appeared to be a situation that required careful investigation to protect Thompson and Associates from potential liability and reputational damage. More personally, Kevin's failure to disclose his resignation or the circumstances that had prompted it suggested that his character hadn't evolved significantly since our divorce. The same tendency to withhold important information and present situations in ways that served his immediate interests had apparently continued to shape his professional behavior. After ending my call with Jennifer, I spent the remainder of Friday afternoon researching Kevin's recent professional activities and Digital Edge Marketing's current status within Austin's marketing community. My network of industry contacts and professional relationships, built over nearly a decade of strategic business development, provided access to information that wouldn't be available through standard reference checks or formal inquiries. What I discovered was deeply troubling and confirmed that Patricia Williams's diplomatic warnings had been understated rather than exaggerated. According to 3 separate sources within Austin's marketing community, Kevin had been involved in a series of professional missteps over the past 6 months that had damaged both his reputation and Digital Edge Marketing's relationships with several important clients. The most serious incident involved Kevin's handling of a social media campaign for Austin Metro Credit Union, one of Digital Edge's largest and most prestigious clients. According to my contact at a competing firm who had been approached by the credit union about taking over their marketing, Kevin had allegedly shared confidential strategic information about the credit union's expansion plans with representatives of a commercial real estate development company that was pursuing the same opportunities. The breach of client confidentiality had resulted in the credit union losing a competitive advantage in negotiations for several prime branch locations, costing them an estimated $2 million in additional real estate costs and delayed expansion timeline. When the credit union discovered that their confidential information had been shared inappropriately, they immediately terminated their relationship with Digital Edge Marketing and began legal proceedings to recover damages. Even more concerning was information about Kevin's personal conduct during the credit union incident. My industry contact indicated that Kevin's inappropriate sharing of client information had occurred during social interactions with the real estate development representatives, suggesting that he had been socializing with business contacts in ways that compromised his professional judgment and client obligations. The second major issue involved Kevin's management of a digital marketing campaign for a chain of local restaurants that had hired Digital Edge to help them compete with national chains moving into the Austin market. According to my sources, Kevin had become personally involved with the restaurant chain's marketing coordinator, a relationship that had created conflicts of interest and compromised his ability to provide objective strategic advice. When the restaurant chain's campaign failed to meet performance targets, Kevin had allegedly blamed the failure on the client's unwillingness to implement his recommendations, rather than acknowledging that his personal relationship with their marketing coordinator had influenced his strategic decisions. The restaurant chain had terminated their contract with Digital Edge and hired a competitor to manage their subsequent marketing efforts. The pattern that emerged from these incidents was remarkably similar to the behavior that had ended our marriage. Kevin appeared to have difficulty maintaining appropriate boundaries in professional relationships, and when his poor judgment created problems, he consistently blamed external factors rather than taking responsibility for his decisions and their consequences. Most troubling was information suggesting that Kevin's professional problems were interconnected with personal issues that mirrored the circumstances of our divorce. According to one of my contacts who had observed Kevin at recent industry events, he had been seen socializing frequently with younger women in the marketing community, often in contexts that seemed inappropriate for married professional interactions. This information was particularly significant because Kevin had married Brittany Chen 3 years after our divorce, and their relationship should have provided the stability and happiness that he'd claimed to be seeking when he left our marriage. The fact that Kevin appeared to be engaging in the same pattern of behavior that had destroyed our relationship suggested that his character flaws were fundamental rather than situational. By Monday morning, I had compiled a comprehensive understanding of Kevin's current professional and personal circumstances that went far beyond what our interview or standard reference checks would have revealed. The picture that emerged was of someone whose career was in decline due to poor judgment and inappropriate behavior, rather than someone who was ready for increased responsibilities at a more prestigious firm. Jennifer Walsh knocked on my office door at 8:30 Monday morning with additional information that she'd gathered over the weekend through her own professional network. Her expression was grave as she settled into the chair across from my desk with a folder containing documentation. About Kevin's situation at Digital Edge Marketing. "Sarah, the Kevin Davis situation is more complicated than we initially realized," Jennifer said, opening her folder and spreading several pages of notes across my desk. "I've spoken with 4 different people who have direct knowledge of his recent professional problems, and the consistent picture is not favorable." Jennifer's research had uncovered additional details about the credit union incident that made Kevin's breach of client confidentiality even more serious than I had initially understood. According to a contact at the credit union itself, Kevin had not only shared strategic information inappropriately, but had also accessed confidential financial documents that were supposed to be restricted to senior account management staff. The unauthorized access to client financial information represented a potential violation of federal banking regulations and had prompted the credit union to file a formal complaint with the Texas Department of Banking, in addition to their civil lawsuit against Digital Edge Marketing. The regulatory complaint could result in industry-wide sanctions that would make Kevin unemployable at any financial services marketing firm in Texas. "There's more," Jennifer continued, referring to her notes with the systematic thoroughness that characterized all her professional investigations. "I spoke with someone at the restaurant chain that terminated their contract with Digital Edge, and they provided details about Kevin's personal relationship with their marketing coordinator. According to Jennifer's source, Kevin's involvement with the restaurant chain's marketing coordinator had extended beyond simple boundary violations to include situations that could be characterized as sexual harassment. The marketing coordinator, a recent college graduate in her first professional position, had allegedly been subjected to persistent personal attention from Kevin that made her uncomfortable and interfered with her ability to perform her job effectively. When the young woman had attempted to establish professional boundaries with Kevin, he had reportedly responded by excluding her from important meetings and making changes to campaign strategies without consulting her, effectively undermining her position within her own company. The restaurant chain's decision to terminate their contract with Digital Edge had been motivated as much by concerns about Kevin's treatment of their employee as by dissatisfaction with campaign performance. "Did the restaurant chain file any formal complaints about Kevin's conduct?" I asked, recognizing that sexual harassment allegations could create significant legal liability for any company that employed him. "They handled it internally by terminating the Digital Edge contract and ensuring that their marketing coordinator didn't have to interact with Kevin anymore," Jennifer replied. "But my contact indicated that they documented everything thoroughly in case legal action became necessary." The information Jennifer had gathered painted a picture of someone whose professional problems were systemic rather than isolated incidents. Kevin's pattern of inappropriate boundary management, poor judgment about client confidentiality, and inability to accept responsibility for his mistakes suggested character flaws that would make him unsuitable for any client-facing role at Thompson Associates. More concerning was the realization that Kevin's professional deterioration appeared to be accelerating. The incidents Jennifer had documented had all occurred within the past 6 months, suggesting that whatever factors were driving his poor judgment were becoming more pronounced rather than improving over time. "Jennifer, based on everything we've learned, what's your recommendation about Kevin's application?" I asked, though I suspected her response would confirm my own conclusions about his suitability for our senior account manager position. "I think we need to decline his application immediately," Jennifer said without hesitation. "The risk to our client relationships and company reputation is too significant to justify hiring someone with this kind of recent performance history. Beyond that, the potential legal liability from his pattern of inappropriate behavior toward younger female colleagues makes him unacceptable from an HR standpoint." Jennifer's assessment aligned completely with my own evaluation of Kevin's candidacy, but it also created an interesting opportunity to demonstrate the kind of professional decision-making that distinguished exceptional leaders from people who simply held leadership titles. Rather than allowing personal history to influence my hiring recommendation, I would be declining Kevin's application based on objective professional criteria that any reasonable executive would apply. The irony was remarkable in ways that I was still learning to appreciate. Kevin's current professional problems had eliminated any possibility that I might be tempted to hire him out of misplaced sympathy or a desire to demonstrate magnanimity toward my former spouse. His own poor judgment and inappropriate behavior had made the decision straightforward from a business perspective. "I agree completely," I told Jennifer. "Kevin Davis is not suitable for the senior account manager position, and we should move forward with our other candidates. Can you handle the communication about our decision, or would you prefer that I speak with him directly?" Jennifer considered my question carefully before responding. "Given your personal history with Kevin, it might be more appropriate for me to handle the formal communication," she said. "That would eliminate any appearance of personal bias influencing our hiring decision and protect you from any suggestions that you're making employment decisions based on past relationships." Jennifer's suggestion was strategically sound and demonstrated the kind of professional wisdom that had made her such a valuable colleague. By handling Kevin's rejection through standard HR channels, we would ensure that our decision was documented appropriately and couldn't be characterized as personally motivated rather than professionally justified. "That makes sense," I agreed. "Please prepare the standard rejection communication and send it through normal channels. If Kevin requests specific feedback about our decision, you can refer him to the general information we provide all unsuccessful candidates." As Jennifer gathered her materials and prepared to leave my office, I realized that our investigation of Kevin's application had provided an unexpected form of closure on our relationship. Rather than having to wrestle with complex decisions about whether to hire my former spouse, Kevin's own professional failures had eliminated any ethical dilemmas about mixing personal history with business judgment. More importantly, the contrast between Kevin's declining career trajectory and my own professional success illustrated exactly how different our characters and capabilities had always been. While I had responded to the challenges of our divorce by developing greater discipline, strategic thinking, and professional competence, Kevin had apparently continued to make the same kinds of poor decisions that had characterized his behavior during our marriage. The discovery of Kevin's professional problems also validated the instincts that had guided my recovery from our divorce. Rather than focusing on bitterness or revenge, I had channeled my energy into building the kind of professional success that would make me invulnerable to the kinds of character flaws that Kevin continued to demonstrate. The best response to betrayal had been to become someone whose life was so successful and fulfilling that the betrayer's actions became irrelevant. Tuesday morning brought confirmation that our decision to decline Kevin's application had been correct when Jennifer received a call from Patricia Williams at Digital Edge Marketing with additional information about Kevin's situation. Patricia had apparently decided that her diplomatic warnings about Kevin's performance issues hadn't been sufficient to protect Thompson Associates from the risks associated with hiring him. "Sarah, you need to hear what Patricia told me this morning," Jennifer said, settling into my office with notes from her conversation with Digital Edge's HR director. Kevin's resignation wasn't voluntary. Digital Edge was preparing to terminate him for cause, and his resignation was submitted after he was informed that termination proceedings had begun. The fact that Kevin had been facing termination for cause fundamentally changed the nature of his job search and his application with Thompson Associates. Rather than being a strategic career move or even an escape from general performance problems, his resignation had been a last-ditch attempt to avoid having a termination for cause on his employment record. Did Patricia provide details about the cause for termination? I asked, though I suspected it related to the client confidentiality breaches and inappropriate conduct that Jennifer had already documented. multiple violations of company policy regarding client confidentiality, inappropriate conduct toward female colleagues, and failure to meet performance standards despite formal warnings and professional development opportunities, Jennifer replied, reading directly from her notes. Patricia said that Digital Edge had been documenting Kevin's problems for over a year and had provided him with multiple opportunities to address his performance issues. The information about formal warnings and professional development opportunities suggested that Kevin's problems at Digital Edge hadn't been sudden developments, but rather ongoing issues that had escalated despite management efforts to help him improve his performance. The fact that he had continued to make poor decisions even after receiving formal warnings indicated either an inability or unwillingness to modify his behavior. Patricia also mentioned that Digital Edge is concerned about potential legal liability from Kevin's conduct toward female colleagues. Jennifer continued, "They've been working with their legal counsel to document everything thoroughly in case former clients or affected employees decide to pursue legal action." The mention of potential legal action confirmed that Kevin's professional problems extended beyond simple performance issues to include conduct that could result in civil liability for sexual harassment or discrimination. Any company that hired Kevin would potentially be assuming responsibility for his past behavior and creating ongoing risk exposure from his demonstrated pattern of inappropriate conduct. "Jennifer, I'm glad we made the decision to decline Kevin's application before learning about these additional issues," I said, recognizing that our early research had prevented us from becoming entangled in Kevin's professional problems. This situation reinforces the importance of thorough background research for all senior-level hires. "Absolutely," Jennifer agreed. "It also demonstrates why informal industry networking is so valuable for HR professionals. Patricia's willingness to share information about Kevin's situation probably saved us from a significant hiring mistake." As Jennifer left my office to finalize the rejection communication for Kevin's application, I reflected on how completely the situation had resolved itself through Kevin's own actions rather than requiring any complex decision-making on my part. The professional problems that had prompted his job search had also made him unsuitable for employment at any reputable marketing firm, eliminating any possibility that I might be influenced by personal considerations in evaluating his candidacy. The resolution was satisfying in ways that went beyond simple vindication or revenge. Kevin's professional decline had been caused by the same character flaws that had destroyed our marriage: poor judgment about boundaries, inability to accept responsibility for his actions, and a tendency to prioritize short-term gratification over long-term consequences. While I had used the pain of our divorce as motivation to develop greater discipline and professional competence, Kevin had apparently continued making the same kinds of mistakes that had cost him our relationship. Wednesday afternoon brought the final chapter in Kevin's application process when Jennifer informed me that she had sent the standard rejection communication through our normal HR channels. The letter thanked Kevin for his interest in Thompson Associates, while explaining that we had decided to pursue other candidates whose qualifications more closely matched our current needs. The language was diplomatically neutral and provided no specific feedback about Kevin's suitability for the position, which was our standard practice for all unsuccessful candidates. From Kevin's perspective, the rejection would appear to be a routine hiring decision based on competitive factors rather than specific concerns about his qualifications or background. "Did Kevin respond to the rejection communication?" I asked, curious about whether he would request additional feedback or attempt to appeal our decision. "He sent a brief thank you email acknowledging our decision and expressing interest in future opportunities," Jennifer replied. "Very professional and appropriate. Whatever his other problems might be, Kevin seems to understand proper business etiquette for this kind of situation." Kevin's gracious response to our rejections suggested that he retained some understanding of professional standards, even if his recent conduct at Digital Edge had violated those standards in significant ways. It was possible that the experience of facing termination and having to search for new employment had provided him with perspective about the consequences of his poor judgment. The entire episode had lasted less than 2 weeks from Kevin's initial application to our final rejection, but it had provided insights about his character and current circumstances that wouldn't have been available through any other means. More importantly, it had demonstrated that the professional success I'd built over the past decade had given me the perspective and resources necessary to handle complex personal situations with appropriate judgment and strategic thinking. Thursday. Morning brought news that would add an unexpected twist to the Kevin Davis situation when Jennifer received a call from Maria Santos, one of the other candidates we'd been considering for the senior account manager position. Maria had learned through industry contacts that Kevin had applied for the same position and wanted to provide additional context about his professional reputation. "Sarah, this is getting interesting," Jennifer said as she entered my office with notes from her conversation with Maria. Maria worked with Kevin on a joint campaign about 2 years ago, and she has some insights about his professional capabilities and character that we should probably consider. Maria's perspective was particularly valuable because she had observed Kevin's work performance and professional conduct in a collaborative setting that would be similar to how he would function within Thompson Associates' team-oriented culture. Her observations would provide insight into Kevin's capabilities and character that wouldn't be available through standard interviews or reference checks. "What did Maria tell you about her experience working with Kevin?" I asked, settling back in my chair to listen to what would likely be the final piece of information about Kevin's professional reputation. Maria said that Kevin was technically competent, but required constant supervision and guidance to maintain appropriate professional standards, Jennifer replied, consulting her notes. She also mentioned that he seemed to have difficulty with complex client relationships and tended to oversimplify strategic challenges in ways that created problems later in campaign implementation. Maria's assessment aligned with the patterns we'd already identified in Kevin's recent performance. Problems at Digital Edge Marketing. His tendency to oversimplify complex challenges and his need for constant supervision suggested someone who lacked the strategic thinking capabilities necessary to excel in senior marketing roles. Did Maria provide specific examples of Kevin's limitations? I asked, recognizing that concrete examples would help me understand exactly how Kevin's professional deficiencies manifested in collaborative work settings. She mentioned a situation where Kevin failed to recognize that a client's budget constraints required significant modifications to their original campaign proposal, Jennifer said, flipping through her notes to find the relevant details. Instead of developing creative solutions that would work within the client's financial limitations, Kevin insisted that the original proposal was the only viable approach and suggested that the client should increase their budget rather than modify their expectations. Kevin's inflexibility in adapting to client constraints was exactly the kind of limitation that would make him unsuitable for Thompson Associates' client-focused culture. Our most successful account managers were those who could develop innovative solutions that met client needs within whatever parameters or constraints they faced. Maria also said that Kevin seemed uncomfortable with female colleagues in leadership positions, Jennifer continued, and that he had a tendency to direct questions and comments toward male team members, even when the women had more relevant expertise or decision-making authority. This information about Kevin's difficulty with female colleagues confirmed the pattern of inappropriate conduct that had contributed to his problems at Digital Edge Marketing. In Thompson Associates' leadership structure, where women held several key positions including my own role as regional director, Kevin's discomfort with female authority would create ongoing interpersonal problems. The conversation with Maria Santos provided the final confirmation that our decision to decline Kevin's application had been correct from every possible perspective. Beyond the serious professional problems that had prompted his resignation from Digital Edge Marketing, Kevin's demonstrated limitations in strategic thinking, client relationship management, and collaborative teamwork made him unsuitable for success in our organizational culture. More satisfying was the realization that the thorough evaluation process we'd conducted had been entirely objective and professionally appropriate. Despite our personal history, I had applied the same rigorous standards to Kevin's candidacy that I would use for any other potential hire, and those standards had clearly indicated that he wasn't qualified for the position he was seeking. The Kevin Davis situation had provided an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate the kind of professional judgment and emotional maturity that distinguished exceptional leaders from people who simply held leadership titles. Rather than being influenced by personal feelings or the desire for vindication, I had evaluated his application based on the same criteria I applied to all candidates and reached conclusions that served Thompson Associates' best interests. As I prepared to finalize our hiring decision by extending an offer to Maria Santos, I realized that the entire experience had been profoundly validating in ways that went far beyond professional satisfaction. The woman Kevin had once considered unworthy of his commitment and investment had evolved into someone whose professional judgment and strategic thinking capabilities were respected throughout Austin's business community. The contrast between Kevin's declining career trajectory and my own professional success provided the most complete form of closure I could have imagined for our relationship. While Kevin continued to struggle with the same character flaws that had destroyed our marriage, I had used the pain of that betrayal as motivation to develop capabilities and achieve success that exceeded anything I had previously thought possible. The best revenge, I realized, hadn't been revenge at all. It had been becoming someone whose life was so successful and fulfilling that Kevin's opinions and actions became completely irrelevant to my happiness and sense of self-worth. Friday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes when complex situations resolve themselves through natural consequences rather than forced interventions. I sat in my corner office reviewing the offer letter that Jennifer had prepared for Maria Santos, our chosen candidate for the senior account manager position, and reflected on how elegantly the Kevin Davis situation had concluded without requiring any dramatic confrontations or emotional processing. Maria's qualifications were exceptional in every category that mattered for success at Thompson Associates. Her portfolio demonstrated innovative strategic thinking. Her references spoke enthusiastically about her ability to manage complex client relationships, and her interview had revealed exactly the kind of collaborative leadership style that thrived in our team-oriented culture. More importantly, her professional reputation was built on integrity, competence, and the ability to deliver results while maintaining the highest ethical standards. The contrast with Kevin's declining career trajectory couldn't have been more stark. While Maria had spent the past 5 years building expertise and establishing herself as one of Austin's most promising marketing professionals, Kevin had been systematically destroying his reputation through poor judgment and inappropriate conduct. The fact that both candidates had applied for the same position at the same time provided a perfect illustration of how different approaches to professional development led to dramatically different outcomes. Michael Thompson knocked on my office door at 9:30, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression that typically accompanied successful hiring decisions. As Thompson Associates founder and CEO, Michael took personal interest in all senior-level appointments and had specifically requested to meet with me before we finalized our offer to Maria Santos. "Sarah, I wanted to congratulate you on your handling of the senior account manager search," Michael said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the relaxed posture of someone who was genuinely pleased with his team's performance. "Jennifer briefed me on the candidates you evaluated, and I'm impressed with both the thoroughness of your process and the quality of your final recommendation." Michael's feedback was particularly gratifying because it confirmed that my handling of Kevin's application had been viewed as professionally appropriate rather than personally motivated. The fact that Michael was commending my evaluation process suggested that I had successfully navigated the complex intersection of personal history and professional responsibility without compromising either my judgment or Thompson Associates' interests. Maria Santos brings exactly the kind of strategic thinking and client relationship expertise that we need to support our continued growth, I replied, opening Maria's file to review the specific qualifications that had made her our top choice. Her track record with complex account development and her collaborative approach to team leadership align perfectly with our company culture. Michael nodded approvingly as he reviewed Maria's credentials and the detailed evaluation summary that Jennifer and I had prepared. What particularly impressed me was your decision to conduct additional background research on all the candidates, he said, looking up from the documents with the kind of focused attention that indicated he was making connections between this hiring process and broader company policies. That level of due diligence reflects exactly the kind of strategic thinking that distinguishes exceptional leaders from people who simply fill leadership positions. The fact that your research revealed significant concerns about one of the candidates demonstrates why thorough evaluation processes are so important for protecting our company and our clients. Michael's observation about the importance of thorough evaluation processes was astute in ways that extended far beyond the immediate hiring decision. The Kevin Davis situation had illustrated how professional reputations could deteriorate rapidly when individuals made poor choices, and how those poor choices could create liability risks for any organization that failed to conduct appropriate background research. I've been thinking about formalizing some of our background research procedures for senior-level hires, I said, recognizing an opportunity to transform the lessons from Kevin's application into broader organizational improvements. The informal, industry networking that helped us identify concerns about one candidate could be systematized to provide better protection for all our hiring decisions. Michael's expression shifted from casual satisfaction to strategic interest as he considered the implications of my suggestion. "That's an excellent idea," he said, leaning forward with the kind of engagement that indicated he was already thinking about implementation details. "Could you work with Jennifer to develop a proposal for enhanced background research procedures? I'd like to review it for possible adoption as standard company policy." The opportunity to develop enhanced hiring procedures represented exactly the kind of strategic initiative that would demonstrate my capabilities as a senior leader while creating lasting value for Thompson Associates. More importantly, it would transform the Kevin Davis situation from a potentially awkward personal encounter into a professional development opportunity that benefited the entire organization. "I'll have a preliminary proposal ready for your review by the end of next week," I said, making notes about the research and consultation that would be necessary to develop comprehensive recommendations. Jennifer and I can also survey other marketing firms to understand industry best practices for senior-level background evaluations. As Michael prepared to leave my office, he paused at the door with the kind of thoughtful expression that suggested he was processing broader implications of our conversation. "Sarah, I want you to know how impressed I've been with your professional development over the past few years," he said, his tone carrying the warmth that characterized his interactions with Thompson Associates' most valued team members. "When you joined our company 5 years ago, I recognized your potential for strategic thinking and client relationship management. But watching you handle complex situations like this hiring process has confirmed that you possess the kind of judgment and leadership capabilities that will be essential for our continued growth." Michael's feedback was deeply meaningful because it represented recognition from someone whose opinion carried significant weight throughout Austin's business community. His assessment of my professional development validated the strategic choices I'd made since joining Thompson Associates and confirmed that my approach to building expertise and credibility had been successful. "Thank you, Michael," I replied, genuinely moved by his recognition of my growth and contributions. Thompson Associates has provided exactly the kind of environment where I could develop my capabilities and contribute to meaningful work. I'm grateful for the opportunities you've given me to take on increasing responsibilities. After Michael left, I spent the remainder of the morning reviewing the offer package for Maria Santos and preparing for the call that would officially extend Thompson Associates' invitation for her to join our team. The process of finalizing her offer provided a satisfying conclusion to a hiring process that had tested my professional judgment while demonstrating my ability to handle complex personal situations with appropriate discretion and strategic thinking. At 11:30, I called Maria to extend our offer for the senior account manager position. Her enthusiastic acceptance and genuine excitement about joining Thompson Associates confirmed that we had made the right choice based on both professional qualifications and cultural fit. "Sarah, I'm thrilled about this opportunity," Maria said, her voice carrying the kind of authentic enthusiasm that indicated she understood the significance of joining Thompson Associates' team. "I've heard wonderful things about the company culture and the quality of work you do with clients. I'm looking forward to contributing to the team's continued success." Maria's response reminded me of my own excitement when Michael had offered me the account coordinator position 5 years earlier. The eagerness to prove herself worthy of the opportunity, combined with genuine appreciation for the chance to work with respected professionals, suggested that Maria possessed the same hunger for professional growth that had driven my own success at Thompson Associates. "We're excited to have you join the team," I replied, reviewing the start date and orientation schedule that Jennifer had prepared. "Your experience with strategic account development will be valuable as we continue expanding our client relationships. And I think you'll find our collaborative approach to project management allows for exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that makes marketing work rewarding." After finalizing the details of Maria's employment, I realized that the hiring process had provided an unexpected form of closure on the Kevin Davis chapter of my life. Rather than requiring any dramatic confrontation or emotional processing, the situation had resolved itself through Kevin's own professional failures and my objective application of appropriate business standards. The resolution was profoundly satisfying because it demonstrated that the best response to personal betrayal had been to focus on building the kind of professional success that made the betrayer's actions irrelevant. While Kevin had continued making the same poor decisions that had characterized his behavior during our marriage, I had developed capabilities and achieved recognition that exceeded anything I had previously imagined possible. Lunch with Rachel. Torres at the Capitol Grill provided an opportunity to process the week's events and celebrate what felt like a significant milestone in my personal and professional development. Rachel had been my closest confidant throughout my recovery from the divorce and subsequent career advancement, and I knew she would appreciate the elegant way the Kevin situation had concluded. "So, let me understand this correctly," Rachel said after I'd described the entire hiring process from Kevin's initial application through our final decision to hire Maria Santos. "Your ex-husband applied for a job working under you, and instead of having to wrestle with complex decisions about whether to hire him, his own professional problems made the decision straightforward from a business perspective." "Exactly," I replied, raising my wine glass in a small toast to the week's developments. Kevin's current reputation and conduct issues made him unsuitable for employment at any reputable marketing firm, which eliminated any possibility that personal considerations might influence my hiring recommendation. Rachel's smile indicated that she understood the broader significance of how the situation had unfolded. "That's poetic justice in the most satisfying way possible," she observed. "You didn't have to do anything to Kevin or make any difficult choices about mixing personal history with professional judgment. His own character flaws created consequences that protected you from having to deal with him professionally." Rachel's insight captured exactly why the resolution felt so complete and satisfying. The Kevin Davis situation had concluded not through any action on my part, but through the natural consequences of his own decisions and behavior. The same character traits that had made him an unreliable husband had continued to shape his professional conduct, creating problems that made him unemployable at companies that valued integrity and competence. "What's most interesting to me," Rachel continued, "is how differently your lives have evolved since the divorce. You've used the experience as motivation to develop capabilities and achieve success that you might never have pursued if you'd remained married to him. Meanwhile, Kevin seems to have continued making the same kinds of poor decisions that ended your marriage." The contrast Rachel highlighted was indeed remarkable. While I had responded to the pain of betrayal by developing greater discipline, strategic thinking, and professional competence. Kevin had apparently learned nothing from the consequences of his actions. His current professional problems suggested that he remained the same person who prioritized short-term gratification over long-term value creation. I think the difference is that I viewed the divorce as a learning experience that could inform better decisions in the future, I said, considering how the past decade had shaped my approach to both personal and professional relationships. Kevin seems to have viewed it as an unfortunate situation that he escaped from, rather than something that required him to examine his own behavior and make changes. Our conversation continued through the afternoon, covering topics that ranged from my plans for developing enhanced hiring procedures to Rachel's own career developments and personal relationships. The depth and quality of our friendship had been one of the most valuable outcomes of my post-divorce life, demonstrating that authentic relationships could be built on mutual respect and shared values rather than accommodation and compromise. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Rachel made an observation that provided perfect perspective on the week's events. "Sarah, what you've accomplished over the past decade isn't just about professional success or financial stability," she said, her tone carrying the seriousness that characterized her most important insights. "You've become someone who commands respect through competence and integrity rather than through position or circumstance. That's the kind of transformation that creates lasting confidence and authentic power." Rachel's words resonated deeply because they captured something essential about my personal development that went beyond career advancement or material success. The woman Kevin had left behind had been someone who derived her sense of worth from external validation and relationship status. The woman I had become understood her own value and refused to accept less than she deserved in any area of her life. Monday morning brought news that added an unexpected epilogue to the Kevin Davis situation when Jennifer received a call from Patricia Williams at Digital Edge Marketing. Patricia wanted to thank Thompson Associates for handling Kevin's application professionally and to provide an update on his current circumstances that she thought might be relevant for our industry networking. "Sarah, you're going to find this interesting," Jennifer said as she entered my office with notes from her conversation with Patricia. "Kevin Davis has left Austin entirely. Patricia heard through mutual contacts that he's moved to Dallas and is working for a small marketing firm that specializes in local retail clients." The news that Kevin had left Austin suggested that his professional problems had been significant enough to require a complete geographic fresh start. Moving to Dallas would allow him to escape the reputation he'd developed in Austin's marketing community, but it would also represent a significant step backward in terms of career trajectory and professional opportunities. "Did Patricia provide any details about Kevin's new position?" I asked, curious about whether he had been able to find work that matched his previous experience and responsibilities. "It's an associate account manager role at a firm that handles convenience stores and small restaurants," Jennifer replied, consulting her notes about Patricia's update. "Significantly below his previous position at Digital Edge, both in terms of responsibility and compensation." The fact that Kevin had been forced to accept a position below his previous level confirmed that his professional problems had been serious enough to damage his marketability throughout Austin's marketing community. The move to Dallas and acceptance of a reduced role suggested that he was struggling to find employment that matched his experience and previous compensation. Patricia also mentioned that Kevin's wife filed for divorce last month, Jennifer added, looking up from her notes with an expression that indicated she understood the significance of this information. Apparently, his professional problems weren't limited to work relationships. The news about Kevin's divorce was deeply satisfying in ways that I was still learning to process. The same character flaws that had destroyed our marriage had apparently continued to shape his behavior, ultimately costing him his second marriage as well as his professional reputation. The pattern suggested that Kevin's problems were fundamental, aspects of his character rather than situational issues that could be resolved through changed circumstances. "It sounds like Kevin is experiencing the natural consequences of decisions and behavior patterns that have been consistent throughout his adult life," I observed, recognizing that his current difficulties validated every aspect of my recovery and professional development over the past decade. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "What's interesting is that his problems seem to have accelerated after he applied here," she said. "I wonder if encountering you in a position of professional authority made him realize how differently your lives had evolved since the divorce." Jennifer's speculation was intriguing because it suggested that our interview might have contributed to Kevin's broader recognition of how poorly his life had developed compared to the opportunities he had abandoned. The contrast between my professional success and his declining circumstances might have been more devastating than any direct confrontation could have been. The information about Kevin's continued difficulties provided the most complete form of closure I could have imagined for our relationship. Rather than requiring any active intervention or emotional processing on my part, Kevin's own character had created consequences that validated every choice I had made since our divorce. That evening, I sat in my Westlake Hills townhouse reviewing the proposal I was developing for enhanced hiring procedures, reflecting on how the Kevin Davis situation had evolved from a potentially awkward personal encounter into a professional development opportunity that would benefit Thompson Associates for years to come. The enhanced background research procedures I was proposing would systematize the informal networking and industry intelligence gathering that had revealed Kevin's professional problems. By creating formal processes for evaluating candidates' reputations and professional conduct, Thompson Associates could avoid the liability risks and cultural disruption that would have resulted from hiring someone with Kevin's documented performance issues. More importantly, the proposal demonstrated my ability to transform challenging situations into strategic opportunities that created lasting organizational value. The same analytical thinking and strategic planning capabilities that had driven my career advancement were now being applied to strengthen Thompson Associates' operational procedures and risk management practices. As I finalized my recommendations, I realized that the entire Kevin Davis experience had been profoundly educational, in ways that extended far beyond the immediate hiring decision. It had tested my ability to maintain professional objectivity despite personal history, demonstrated the value of thorough evaluation processes, and provided opportunities to showcase the kind of leadership judgment that distinguished exceptional executives from adequate managers. The resolution had been elegant in its simplicity. Kevin's own actions had created consequences that eliminated any moral complexity about how to handle his application. Rather than having to choose between personal feelings and professional obligations, I had been able to apply objective standards that clearly indicated he was unsuitable for the position he was seeking. Wednesday brought the final piece of information about Kevin's situation when Maria Santos mentioned during her first-week orientation that she had heard through industry contacts about his circumstances in Dallas. Kevin's new position was indeed significantly below his previous role, and his reputation in Austin's marketing community had been damaged enough that several firms had declined to consider him for positions that matched his experience. I heard about Kevin Davis when I was networking before accepting this position, Maria said during our first one-on-one meeting to discuss her integration into Thompson Associates' team structure. Several people mentioned that he'd had some professional difficulties and had to relocate to find new opportunities. Maria's casual mention of Kevin's reputation confirmed that his professional problems had become common knowledge throughout Austin's marketing community. The fact that she had heard about his difficulties before accepting our offer suggested that his conduct issues were being discussed widely enough to serve as cautionary examples for other marketing professionals. Industry networking can be incredibly valuable for understanding professional reputations and avoiding potential problems, I replied, using Maria's observation as an opportunity to reinforce the importance of the enhanced background research procedures I was developing. The marketing community in Austin is smaller than people realize, and professional reputations travel quickly through informal networks. Maria nodded knowingly. That's exactly why I was so excited about joining Thompson Associates, she said. The company's reputation for integrity and professional excellence is well established throughout the industry. Working here will enhance my own professional credibility and provide opportunities to learn from respected leaders. Maria's perspective reminded me of my own excitement when I had first joined Thompson Associates 5 years earlier. The opportunity to work with respected professionals in an environment that valued competence and integrity had been transformative for my career development and personal confidence. The following month brought recognition that validated every aspect of my professional development when the Austin Business Journal announced its annual 40 Under 40 list of rising business leaders. My inclusion on the list represented acknowledgement of my contributions to Thompson Associates' growth and my emerging reputation as one of Austin's most promising marketing executives. The profile that accompanied my recognition highlighted the strategic thinking and client relationship expertise that had driven my advancement from account coordinator to regional director of operations in just 5 years. More importantly, it positioned me as an example of how focused professional development and commitment to excellence could create opportunities for rapid career advancement in Austin's competitive business environment. Michael Thompson's reaction to my recognition was particularly gratifying. Sarah, this kind of industry acknowledgement reflects not just your individual achievements, but the strength of Thompson Associates' commitment to developing exceptional talent, he said during the company meeting where he announced my recognition to the entire team. The fact that you've been recognized as one of Austin's rising business leaders demonstrates that our investment in professional development and strategic thinking creates value that extends far beyond individual career advancement. Your success enhances Thompson Associates' reputation throughout the business community. The recognition provided perfect closure on the decade-long journey that had begun with Kevin's betrayal and my subsequent determination to rebuild my life on my own terms. The woman who had been left financially devastated and emotionally shattered by her husband's abandonment had evolved into someone whose professional achievements were recognized throughout Austin's business community. As I reflected on the path that had led from that devastating afternoon in Kevin's office to my current position as regional director of operations at one of Austin's most respected marketing firms, I realized that the transformation had been about far more than career advancement or financial success. It had been about discovering capabilities I never knew I possessed and developing the kind of authentic confidence that comes from proving your worth through competence rather than accommodation. The Kevin Davis situation had provided the perfect capstone to that transformation. Rather than requiring any dramatic confrontation or emotional processing, his own professional failures had demonstrated the contrast between someone who had continued making poor decisions and someone who had used adversity as motivation for growth and development. The best revenge I had learned wasn't revenge at all. It was becoming someone whose life was so successful and fulfilling that the betrayer's actions became completely irrelevant to your happiness and sense of self-worth. Kevin could continue, struggling with the consequences of his character flaws, while I focused on building the kind of professional success and personal satisfaction that made his opinions and circumstances entirely immaterial to my future. 6 months later, I received news that provided the perfect conclusion to the Kevin Davis chapter, when Rachel mentioned that she had heard he was no longer working in marketing at all. According to her industry contacts, Kevin had taken a sales position with a Dallas-based insurance company, representing a complete departure from the marketing career he had once considered his primary professional identity. The news that Kevin had left marketing entirely suggested that his professional problems had been severe enough to require not just geographic relocation, but complete career change. The dreams and ambitions he had once prioritized over our marriage had apparently been destroyed by the same character flaws that had cost him our relationship. Meanwhile, I was preparing for another promotion that would make me Thompson Associates' youngest vice president and position me for even greater opportunities in Austin's business community. The contrast between our professional trajectories provided the most complete vindication possible for every choice I had made since our divorce. The woman Kevin had once considered unworthy of his commitment had become someone whose professional judgment and strategic thinking were valued throughout. Austin's marketing industry, the life he had abandoned in pursuit of what he believed would be unlimited possibilities, had evolved into exactly the kind of success he had claimed to want for himself. As I prepared for the challenges and opportunities that would come with my new role as vice president, I realized that Kevin Davis had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible. By forcing me to discover my own strength and capabilities, he had set in motion a transformation that had exceeded anything I could have achieved while accommodating his limitations and poor judgment. The betrayal that had once seemed devastating had actually been liberating, creating opportunities for growth and achievement that would never have been possible within the constraints of our marriage. Kevin's decision to leave had been the best thing that ever happened to my professional development and personal fulfillment, even though he would never understand the irony of that outcome. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.